Your dad had how many wives?
5.
5. And then how many brothers and sisters you have?
45, 44 lived.
But you have now been able to reformulate your foundations to something that relates more with an interconnectedness and also an outer connectedness of bringing everything into oneness of consciousness.
Yeah. Belief causes you to go in a direction of an idea that may not necessarily be correct, and then you ignore the actual thing because it's not in line with a belief. And you don't have to die to have the rising of consciousness.
Spirituality and capitalism belong together. Those thoughts, those feelings, that comes from something bigger than I am. And together I believe we can all grow. That's how we're going to change the world. That's how we're going to change the planet. All right, so today I'm sitting here with Clayne Edward Wayman. And it's an honor to have you here. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come down to the studio and talk to us about your new book and what you're doing that way, and really just sharing, your journey. I mean, you've had such a beautiful awakening over the last 8 years that I would say that you have been steeped so deep in spiritual practices, but from a controlled spiritual practice to now something that is more self-discovery versus outsourcing your feeling the connection to God to actually having that internal feeling of God.
Yeah. Thank you, Dalton. I appreciate you inviting me on and being here.
Yeah, man. It's pretty amazing. So if you can do me a favor, take us just back a little bit, right? Like
Certainly.
Give us a little bit of your history. I don't often have people here in the studio that have come from such an interesting background as yourself. I mean, being raised in polygamy. And so for those people that are not aware of polygamy is an offset of the LDS Church, the Mormon Church, way back in New York City. Basically, you had the two groups of people. One went one direction and the other one went another direction. And from that, really what's the difference in there is that the polygamous groups take on multiple wives. They raise, hundreds of children. And I've known people in polygamy very closely, actually. And there's some things I find very beautiful about it. I mean, just truly what I find beautiful about it in the cultural side of things. And there's some things I find very disturbing about it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So it follows under the umbrella of what many people refer to as Mormonism, that originated in New York, like you mentioned. And my ancestors effectively came over the plains with Brigham Young. They were all part of that original church, and it was they continued this practice that they felt like was the way to get to the highest degree of glory with God. And when there was this political movement in the late 1800s, there was a lot of pressure from the government to abolish this so that we may obtain statehood. And there's just a huge number of people that wanted to continue this practice, and that was where my family ultimately came from as well. As far as spirituality goes, what's really profound about it is ever since I was a kid, I had this something within me that it felt like that. Why did these men or women have these profound spiritual experiences, and why am I not? Like, I felt like I'm doing all the things that they taught us that we're supposed to do. And it wasn't until I discovered this path of plant medicine when I discovered, or true spirituality, if you will, where you're not outsourcing it to something outside of you, and it's actually a profound journey within yourself.
That's beautiful. I really appreciate that. So you're born in polygamy. Obviously, you don't choose this.
Yeah.
You're around this culture. And when we were speaking earlier, you were talking about, listen, I was born on a farm here in Utah. I learned a lot of hard work. I was surrounded by many brothers and sisters and cousins. And you were telling me that your grandfather, the lineage of his seed was like 1,000 people.
1,000 plus, yeah.
Wow. And I think about what it must have been like for your father to have, multiple wives and multiple children, and the responsibility that must have been to be able to support all of that. Even though that you've chosen to move on from that, do you have a deep respect for that?
There is a tremendous amount of respect for what the hard work and the dedication that goes into it. There's some things that you could get into and complain about. And as my spiritual journey has progressed, I've really chosen to see what works and what doesn't work. And I would say that what really does work is when things come together from the basis of love. And the thing that I would say isn't something that is a strong foundation is a lot of times when they put this idea or this narrative in their mind that in order for you to be accepted in the highest degrees with God, you must live this particular way. I feel like it's a beautiful thing that no matter what type of relationship anyone wishes to fashion, that it's grounded in complete consent and love, and I think that can be beautiful. And I think the opposite's true even in monogamous relationships. I like I was sharing with you earlier, is I really feel like that relationships, no matter what type of relationship, whether it's a monogamous relationship or a multiplicity of relationships, it reveals thyself. And I've been an entrepreneur my entire life, and I feel like entrepreneurialism reveals thyself in a very powerful way as well. And it's been a beautiful evolution over the last 8 years in this.
Yeah, you must feel so proud of yourself. And I know for myself, I'm proud of you. And the reason I'm proud of you is to be able to break away from something that's so steeped in tradition and in family and in ritual and in who you are and what you are and who you were meant to be in this world and all this laid out path, right? From little tiny small child, for you to say, listen, the way that I'm living my life is not within actual integrity with what I believe. And so I'm literally going to separate myself from all of that, because one of the most painful things a man can do, or anybody can do, and that is to be ostracized by their own community.
Yes.
And for you to do that, I mean, that's an immense amount of bravery.
Thank you. I appreciate that. When I officially left, I had a great relationship with the leadership of this particular organization, and I made a phone call and shared with him that I was moving on. I felt like that was an act of integrity for me to do that. And when part of the departing we had like an hour conversation, and part of the departing conversation, he said, if you find anything better, will you come let me know? I haven't found anything better than Mormonism, so come tell me. So approximately a little over two months ago, I felt like from a position of integrity that I need to make that phone call and say, I found something better. And I met with him, and he had enough integrity, I would like to say, to even meet with me. He could have just wrote me off and said, I'm not going to meet with this scoundrel. And he at least had the integrity to meet with me. And one of the things that was, I would say, the hallmark of that meeting was I found something better. And what is better is what spirituality really is you're coming back to the fundamental reality of what life is. It's not based on my belief. It's not based on your belief. It's not based on somebody else's belief. It's a connection with your own source. And while they advocated integrity, like one of the things he said to me, they talk about advocating. It's one thing to advocate integrity. It's another thing to stand in it. It's fundamentally different. And so you can give lip service to integrity all day long, but until you actually stand in it. And so what I mean by standing in it is instead of talking about the divine or talking about God and prescribing a belief system or a doctrine around it, do what is done in the Eastern cultures. It's the things they teach are methods of discovery. If I wanted to con you, and this is something I had this conversation with, if I wanted to con you or if I wanted to con anybody, the last thing I would want you to do is to discover. And so the better way that I shared with him, I says, I found a better way, and the better way is discovery. And
that's really beautiful. And, in your book, you talk about how you discover that.
Yeah.
How you come to this realization. And what I understand is that this is with plant medicines, like that you have this awakening. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, I mean, it takes a lot to break the chains of doing that. It takes a lot to be able to say, okay, listen, like I recognize that I am not standing in my own integrity. I recognize that I'm not doing these things. I recognize I might be thinking something. I mean, you told me off camera that, listen, like I don't believe that really what most of the members are even doing, that they're standing in a level of integrity. They simply are that's just where they're at. But something had to shake your foundation enough for you to walk away from all of that. Because it's like, you ever seen the movie The Village?
You know what? I'd like to say I did, but I haven't.
So The Village is what it reminds me of, right?
Yeah.
So you have this whole community that is built upon a belief system, and there's basically, I'm not trying to ruin the movie for you, but that there is something going on inside of the village, and that thing holds everybody from going outside of the village, right? And religion, even though there's so many beautiful things about it, often there's something going inside of that community that holds people away from the rest of the world to discover. I mean, I was told in the LDS community growing up that way, that I was not to go read other books. I was not to go search, ponder, and pray in other places.
Yeah.
Only in that particular place.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's something that comes up in that. There's a few things that come up. One thing that I feel to echo is when you have these, when you talk about these religions and you talk about the things that they struggle from, there's a really big point that I wish to make, and that is, I'm not looking to put these people down. I'm not looking to. That's when I even said to this leader. When I say the leader, to put it in their context, they called him the president of priesthood, or in the LDS context, he would be referred to as the prophet. I told him, I said, I'm not here to make you look bad. I'm not here to put you down, because my invitation is to ultimately cause these people to have an experience to where they can rise. So when I talk to him about, and I talk to the world, if you will, of these things that they're struggling with, like they struggle with alcohol, they struggle with, like this community is riddled with alcohol. And I says, the reason why they're riddled with alcohol and other vices, society even in general, it's not just this community, is they're at the core of themselves, they're crying out for an experience with their divine. They're disconnected from their source, and true spirituality gives them the opportunity to really connect with the source. And so that's ultimately my invitation. My invitation is not to say, hey, you're bad, you're dumb, you're stupid. And that's quite often what they hear, and that's not what I want them to hear. Because when I step out of the community and I say these things, the way they dismiss truth is, oh, that's just anti-Mormon rhetoric. And I become some anti-Mormon. This is not about being anti-Mormon. This is pro-divine. This is, let's make a connection with your real source, not the source that you have believed or what the idea of it, but your actual connection to what it is. And that's my invitation, not only for this community, but ultimately for the world. We live in a world, we talked a little bit about vices. And the vices that we have in the world is because of that lost connection. And there's some people, even in plant medicine circles, that they trade their vice for something else. And we talked a little bit about that as well. Because it's about having the experience and then going and applying it in your life. Like being here right now. Like there's books that's been written on this, great authors. To find out what is behind this and then apply it in your life. It's an opportunity to step in a higher level of intelligence. And one of the things that to step in a higher level of intelligence is the expansion of consciousness. And I could go into that conversation. I think it's worth noting is the fundamental aspect of life, you and I, at our most fundamental level, without consciousness, we are dead. And I had this conversation with a Christian not too long ago. I'm like, what is, and I wanted to speak in that dialect, or in that mindset for
Understand.
And I said, at the very fundamental level, what is the resurrection? Isn't the resurrection the rise of life? Life rising. Well, the way life rises, at the most fundamental, if you wanted to build a home, you must go to the foundation. If you wanted to give rise to a home, I've been in mortgage finance for over 20 years. If I want to give rise to a home, shouldn't I, like the most fundamental aspect of that home is the footings and the foundation. The footings and foundation of life is consciousness. So if you want to have a conversation of life rising, or the resurrection, because the resurrection is life rising, you must look to the most fundamental aspect, and the fundamental aspect is consciousness expanded. And so what I see in these religions is by people not having these discoveries, their consciousness stays narrow, and that's what belief does. Belief causes you to go in a direction of an idea that may not necessarily be correct, and then you ignore the actual thing because it's not in line with the belief, instead of actually discovering it. And so my invitation to people is, if you want to, and this is something I said to him, is if you want to stand in what the resurrection stands for, the rise of life, is that you must focus on the rising of your consciousness. And you don't have to die to have the rising of consciousness. You can drink there's this legend I talked about in the Amazon jungle, Yahe, for example. That is considered the original sacrament of Christ. And religions have watered down the sacrament to the point where it's just water and tasteless bread.
Oh, man. It almost leaves me speechless when you said that it's been watered down so much from the original sacrament that was held into the Amazon jungles. Because I have partaken in that sacrament. And to me, the reason I only will do it once a year at this moment in my life is because it is so profoundly sacred.
Yes.
It is so much wisdom and truth brought into that plant. And it sounds like to me then through all of your experiences with plant-based medicines, you have came to this taking of your old belief systems, which they're still rooted in us. Like they're always going to be there. The teachings and the education and the knowledge and the experiences and the hard work and all of those things that built your foundation, truly. But you have now been able to reformulate your foundations to something that relates more with an interconnectedness and also an outer connectedness of bringing everything into oneness of consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of things that religions do that are universal principles that work, and the lie about some of these things is that they're the author of them. And a good example of this is I did a Facebook Live not too long ago, and I said, no matter what your belief system is, you're going to need to drink water.
Facts.
Because you and I are approximately anywhere from 60 to 70% water, and if that ratio were to go down, we would die of dehydration. And so whether you're a Mormon, a Muslim, a Jew, an atheist, this is a fundamental aspect to who we are of being human. And so if you were part of a religion that carried the narrative that they are the one true church of water, and you discovered that actual water comes from the sky freely, and there's this endless supply of water, and the earth is 70% water, and you left that religion, your boycott, and this is what I see a lot in religion, is when they step away from the religion, they'll give up water. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that, a good example of that is alcohol is not necessarily a good thing that you should probably drink on a regular basis at certain levels, right? Because of the destruction it does. And what I've seen people that have been part of religions where they couldn't drink any alcohol, for example, they step away from the universal principles. Like, it doesn't matter if in religion or not religion, alcohol consumption at a certain dosage wreaks havoc on the body.
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into that. And that is that when people leave, so I see this all the time, and I have seen this all the time since I was a young kid.
Yeah.
And that is that people leave their faith and they leave their communities, which is very, very painful. And all of the things that faith spoke against, mm-hmm. they get really curious about.
Yeah.
And there is foundations that are built in truth. And I think that's why people get confused and why they get tied so deeply into religion, because there is foundations, right, of pillars of truth. And those pillars make sense and they hold societies together and cultures together and so on. But the reason I wanted to bring that up is because here in all over the world really, but in Utah I see it very prominently. And that is like this LS community, right, which is this ability to be able to love the way you want to love, whether it's having multiple partners, whether it is multiple group partners, there's just no judgment on anything. And these are wonderful human beings. And the ones that I have met specifically have left their faith, right? And I bring this up for a reason because we've had really beautiful conversations that I think one of the most valuable conversations we've had was about relationships.
Yes.
Right? So there's a lot of, and I'm not against this, but there's a lot of polyamory out there.
Certainly.
Right? And so about 2 years ago now, I was doing some inner work. And then during that inner work, I got a very clear message that said, in order to not have suffering internally, then that means that I cannot be attached to anything. I mean, I can't be attached to how my business is what it's going to do in the future. I can't be attached to whether my friends and family are healthy, whether they die, whatever it is. I can't be attached to romantic relationships. And so therefore I just need to be free and be open and just basically love whoever it is I want to do. And it doesn't really matter. And what I found in that is that it caused so much pain and so much suffering. And I had told you, I said at one point in time, I told my mom, I said, listen, I'm done with relationships. They don't work. I don't believe in monogamy. And so I'm going to have 2 or 3 girlfriends and I'm just going to do that. And she was so really supportive of it. She says, okay, like you do you know what I mean? And that never happened because I realized not very quickly. It took me a while to realize that. But what I noticed is all it did was cause pain in not having attachment towards people. And it didn't create safety in any relationship I had. It didn't matter what it was. It created no safety. And I believe that a relationship is based upon trust and safety and communication and the transparency of that, right? Which I was doing none of those.
Yeah.
Like I look at it now, and then I didn't have any judgments towards it, but then I did. And when we were talking about it, and we were talking about the ability to have multiple partners at once, because your dad had how many wives?
5.
5. I can't imagine personally. That is so much responsibility. And then how many children did they have total? Your brothers and sisters you have?
45, 44 lived. Yeah.
I mean, that is such an amount of of responsibility. So I can't imagine that personally. But why do you think, because this was interesting, we talked about this earlier.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to bring this up again because I think it's very valuable for people that are thinking of this or that they're going to experiment in this world or they want to get involved in the LS world. Why do you think multiple partners do not work? Because what I have seen, the beauty of it is I've got to look behind the veil of what I didn't realize there was a whole community going on, and I didn't get to know this community because I want to be involved with the community. It just happened to be that there were relationships that were close to me, that their friends were involved in that community.
Yeah,
and I got a really deep understanding from a personal inner world of seeing the pain in that community.
Yeah.
Why do you think this isn't working?
Well, I would first like to preface what I'm about to say around it, that when it comes to any type of relationship, I'm not speaking down on it or bad about
Understand.
it. And what I'm going to talk about is the truth that I speak is the truth that water runs downhill with gravity. The sun rises in the east. These are fundamental truths that exist. And so when I'm about to say what I'm going to say, this isn't something to make somebody feel bad or like they're wrong or they're doing something or I don't even want to say they're stupid or anything.
It's their experience, though, for sure, right? Like, it's not about judging their experience.
Yeah, so I want to preface what I'm about to say with that. And it's this. We live in a world where we are intoxicated with addictions. We have sports, we have Netflix, we have your Dorito chips. You have food companies that their entire design is to try and get you addicted. Social media algorithms that are to get you addicted to scrolling and to suck you in. We live in a very addicted world. And so what happens, especially I've witnessed this with people coming out of religion, where sex was considered a taboo thing, and it wasn't celebrated, not necessarily looked at in the positive light that it could be. What I see with the multiplicity of relationships is it's somebody's next bag of Doritos. It's coming from the place of it's all based on where it's coming from, and I see it that it's coming. The foundation of it is coming from gluttony. It's not coming from this. It's not coming from this spiritual basis of truth. What I said to you earlier is I said it's not grounded in truth, and that's why it falls. And it doesn't matter if you're in a monogamous relationship, if you're in a relationship just by yourself, if you are in a polyamorous type of relationship. I would ask the question: what is it truly grounded in? Is it grounded in your gluttony, and by having multiple partners, you're able to not address certain things? Like one thing I said to you earlier is relationships is a wonderful opportunity to face thyself, whether it is a relationship with with one partner or multiplicity. And so the reason why I would say in the community that I came from, it doesn't necessarily work, is because it's grounded in this falsehood that in order to reach the highest degree with God, you must live this certain way, where your relationship with the divine is a one-on-one experience. And one of the things the religions have done is they've taken God and put God outside of yourself, and that is just fundamentally flawed. And this is not my opinion. In the process of discovery, I'm not the first one that's discovered this. The Buddha, the great Gautama Siddhartha of Nepal, that he discovered this. The Buddha is a title of he who has awakened. The Swamis, the mystics, the shamans, the Taitas, they all know this, that it is within. You are not separated from your source. I am not separated from my source. And one of the things I sat with a Taita from the jungle this last weekend, one of the things he said, Satanism, or the ego, is to take the divine and cause you to go looking outward. And so people are going to look inside the bottle of an alcohol, their sports team, their bag of Doritos, or the multiplicity of relationships to fill that void that is right here within themselves, that no other relationship can fill. No bag of Doritos or no bottle of vodka can heal or give you the experience that is to be had right here with yourself. And that's why I say it's not grounded in truth, and that's why it crumbles. Now, if it was grounded in truth and your source guided you in that direction, is it possible? Okay, it is possible. I could see it being beautiful if it was flowing from that, what I often call the river of truth. If it's flowing from that river of truth. But I'm seeing that a lot of people are not flowing from that river. They're flowing from gluttony. They're flowing from trying to fill a void.
Yeah, I think what you said makes it is so beautifully said. So thank you for that. Yeah. Like extreme amounts of wisdom, because you have witnessed these things. One of the things I have recognized when it comes to relationships, when it comes to having a partner, when it comes to creating a family, often we're told in our culture that we find somebody in our culture, in our communities, that complete us. Yeah. The word of completion means I'm not already completed, right? And I have to have this other half in order to be completed. Now, what I have said about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, is that I wanted a relationship that was based upon a pyramid. And one was myself, my partner, and at the top was God, or consciousness, or awakening, or something higher than myself. What I didn't realize in going in that journey, and I'm realizing this more and more, a relationship is not about just completion or friendship or any of those things. What it is a spiritual journey. It's a spiritual mirror that is put up to self to be able to say like, ooh, I don't like the way I acted here. Because the deeper you love someone, the more you can hurt someone, because you know how to hurt them, right? Like there's that space where you're like, oh, I have this knife that I can use, but it's choosing not to use that. But really it's that awareness that starts to happen within self. And so it becomes a spiritual like unity of moving things forward. But if I'm looking for a partner that is either in gluttony, just for purely for sexual purposes or to feel good about myself or whatever those things are going to be, eventually that is going to be something that is hollow,
Absolutely.
that it doesn't have any value and it isn't providing any really internal growth, because I'm very, very grateful that I had parents that told me since day one that a relationship is work.
100%.
And it's some of the deepest work. You sleep next to them, you wake up next to them. You hear them fart. They don't always look beautiful. Like it's not some movie. Like there's so much more depth that comes into that. But I have witnessed in myself with my partner that when I was willing to give up, and this is something I've just been really coming to not terms with, but realizing so much of the beauty in this. When I was willing to separate those energies, when I was willing to start to see women as my sisters and as my aunts and as my mothers and as my teachers and those things, then I could see my partner in a way of that erotic, that energy, that like kind of that more animalistic energy in that capacity, but also see her as a queen and also see her as my teacher and also see her as my friend, but not to say, if you don't give me these things, then I'm not happy. If you don't do these things, then I am not fulfilled. And I think that there's something that's really missing in the world. And I'm not to say I'm the one to teach it, but I do know from my own personal experiences that it changed everything because it created such a level of safety within the relationship that she could stand truly in her feminine energy, which you talk a lot about. And I can stand fully in my masculine energy, even though I am both. I'm not just one or the other, but I can stand in that primarily to support her in her journey so she can reach as high to the heavens as she wants to. And I can stay grounded here and allow her to bring that knowledge down to the families and the tribes and the community and so on. And so I think that when you said that there's a gluttony going on and there's these experiences going on, and that when we basically take the fruit that had that foundation in it, and we say this fruit no longer belongs, like this doesn't nourish me anymore, and I now deny everything I learned, I take everything that my experience is, and I realize this was no longer, that this doesn't serve me, which is simply not true. It's just that maybe some of the belief systems in that, which is the outsourcing of God instead of the insourcing and having a personal relationship or personal relationship with the divine or whatever you want to call it, it's something to everybody, but it is all built on truth.
100%. Yeah, one of the things I've been talking a lot about lately is discovering your own inner master, your master within. And we are ultimately an expression of the truth. Our source is the truth. And what I mean by that is we were born in a state of complete surrender. And when I say surrender, I've asked people questions. It sounds like giving up. It's like almost like you're giving up. What it really is when we are a child, we're born in a state that I refer to as the truth state. Like we were born into a state from the impulse of life itself, upside down and naked, where we are in such a vulnerable state. And we have to rely on the processes of life even to survive our own birth. And the entire birth process, to me, is one of the most incredible divine dances, that it is one of the greatest teachers of how to be in our life. There's a great quote from Christ that says, "Don't give no thought for tomorrow." To me, what that is referring to is this being in this state of trust and in surrender. And I don't think that you can fully have a complete trust with the divine until you have that discovery. What religion has done and what society has done is they say, oh, this vulnerable state is too dangerous, and so you need to believe a certain way, and your attention now begins, instead of trusting in what life gave you, life itself, you're now looking for sources outside of you to sustain you. And I think that's where people go into the false self, which I refer to as the ego, or the Taitas might call the Satan aspect of you, the dark aspect of you. This is why you do things we'll just call it the shadow aspects. It's because we're pulling ourselves away from that truth state. And here's something that's really provocative in the spiritual communities is people have these profound experiences, and we talked earlier about the God complex. You discover that you are not separate from your source, and people can interpret that from their religious framework and say, oh, I am this next Messiah or whatever. This is what's provocative is you must, and there's so many people I met in the spiritual community that dismiss a lot of things because it's like, oh, well, I'm God. Well, their framework of, oh, I'm God is some dude that sits on a throne and dictates to the world. That's their framework. And so they act in the ego of what that is. Instead of the provocative aspect is, no, I am a body in surrender to my source. And it brings a whole entire dimension of humility. Like, it's divine to be human and to really step into the humanness and surrender to the impulse of life. Because I really see that the true impulse of life will lead us to our ultimate joy. And when we step outside of that surrender, that's when we get hurt. I think that's where we find where suffering happens. And we're stepping outside of the flow of truth. We're stepping out of I call it the river of truth, but you're stepping out of the river of the impulse of life. And this truth impulses within us. And I know I'm not the only one that says this. I have recently discovered a few months ago another mystic from me. I thought I was the only one that talks about this kind of stuff. And I recently discovered a mystic from India that says some of these same things. And I about fell off my chair when I heard some of the things that come out of her mouth.
I love that because truth is everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And we think we're the originators of
Yes.
truth. And it's been around us forever. And there's been many people that have been on the same journey. It's like we're almost repeating time. We're almost repeating patterns. We're going through the same type of evolution. And I hope that, as we move through this evolution as human beings, as we're slowly bringing our awareness up, that we can keep our awareness up, that we can keep moving towards this. And I think the difference, this is what I'm seeing. Like, if you look back in the 1960s where you had a lot of the movements moving towards, a lot of the group meditations and the transcendental meditations and all this stuff, well, a lot of it, again, was outsourcing my piece, and not having sovereignty for it and also not having responsibility for it. If we can do that, if we can stay responsible, if we can keep our own sovereignty, and if we can make sure that I don't put myself up on any higher pillar than I put you up on, and we can stay at an equal place and we can continue to rise together instead of separate, we're not outsourcing that. And if we're not outsourcing that, then all of a sudden we realize how divine we are. And through that divinity, we can continue to raise that consciousness together. We continue to be kind. We can continue to love. We can continue to honor exactly where people are on their journey.
Absolutely. There's a great I'll talk about another mystic of India, Sadhguru. I'd like to listen to.
I love him.
Yes.
I just listened to him this morning.
Yeah, wonderful,
Incredible human.
He says something really simple and profound. He says, don't put people on a pedestal. Don't look up to them and don't look down to them. Instead, he said he has a daughter and he says, I told her to do the same thing with me. See me for who I am. Because if you put somebody on a pedestal, then you immediately become separated from that person, and they lose value to you. You can't see what value they might be able to exchange with you. And the same is true when you put somebody beneath you. When you even just cognitively put somebody beneath you, there's no. You effectively are disconnected. And he pointed this out. Instead, you see people as they are.
What do you keep seeking for this wisdom?
What's that?
Why do you keep seeking for this wisdom?
Why do I keep seeking it?
Yeah.
A lot of times I have these profound discoveries, and I like to see if there's other people that are saying some of the same things. And there's many things I've shared with people. They're like, "Oh, have you listened to this person? Or have you heard of that person?" I'm like, "No, I haven't." And so I start listening to them, like, "Oh, wow, they're saying from the same thing." A really good example of this is I sat with a Taita from the jungle. A Taita is one of the medicine men of this type of lineage, and which to be a Taita, they're gone through a minimum of a 7 to 8 year rigorous apprenticeship. It's not just somebody who raises their hand and say, I want to do medicine.
Yes, and I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah, yeah.
It's very sacred work.
Yes. And he sat there and he just had this dialogue. And the words that came out of his mouth were things that I had written in my journal 5 years ago that I have not shared with anybody. And some of the same word selection that he used to describe a certain phenomenon was coming out of his mouth. And I said to him, I said, you're saying things that I thought I've only discovered, and you're saying the same things, almost some of the same identical words. And he says, it's because we're connected to the same source.
Oh, man.
And what I call it, my words are, we're drinking from the same river.
And it's nourishing our souls.
And so the things that I'm talking about, even though I may have my own word selection, it's not the first time this has been talked about. But religion causes you to be blind, to not go see that this has been being talked about for thousands of years by the ancients. We could talk about mystics, shamans. Rumi is a really good one.
Yeah.
These sages who have walked the earth, they have talked about some of these same things in their own way. And what's interesting is this is something else that Taitha pointed out. He said, the title Buddha, which I've known this, is one, or he is awakened. Christ or Christ, and so the Buddha is not a name; it's a title. So you and I can be a Buddha, or somebody else could be a Buddha. He pointed out that the word Christ or Christos is also a title for someone who has awakened, who has discovered this divinity within themselves. And so there's this conversation that I've been having for a long time. I use the allegorical story of the Tower of Babel from the Bible, and this really ties into this really well. Is the story in the Tower of Babel is they built this incredible structure to get to God or get to the divine, and what the story shows is that as they were building this structure, there was a cause for their confusion in their language, and the structure stopped and it began to crumble.
Right.
The beautiful thing about an allegorical story or a metaphoric story is there's a lot of hidden meaning in it. And I had an epiphany around this hidden of meaning is we live in a world that is lost in language. And I led a retreat a couple of weeks ago where I shared with people the difference between language and communication and how they are not the same. Language is a construct that we've put together. Communication is happening whether you or I are speaking or not. Language is a great tool. Even Taitha talked about this, and it's a wonderful tool that we can use. And so the wisdom, the wisdom why I seek the wisdom is the religion that I come to or that I was raised in. A lot of religions this is what is a universal truth that is fundamentally flawed with most of them. I'm going to say most of them, especially like the monotheistic and even Mormonism religion, is the foundation is belief, and they put more credence to belief and not wisdom. Because wisdom will guide you if you should speak or if you should remain silent. If you should stand up or should you sit down. And that's what I'm referencing to the inner master, is the inner master guides you in the direction of wisdom. And so the reason why I'm going to these other people like you've asked is, are other people saying these same things? And King Solomon, what did he ask for? He wanted one thing. God said, I'll give you anything. And he asked for one thing, wisdom. He could have asked him for anything. He said, give me your almighty glory. Give me anything. And he asked for one thing, wisdom. Because that's the ultimate of riches. That's the greatest wealth.
And wisdom it takes a long time on this earth to gain that wisdom. It
Yeah.
takes a lot of falling on your face.
A lot of discovering.
A lot of discovery, a lot of picking yourself back up, a lot of tears, a lot of joy, a lot of the duality and all of those things. Your family that is still part of this group, do you wish you had the ability to somehow awaken them?
Well, it's really up to them. But I would certainly like to plant a seed. Here's something I would like to say is they talk about priesthood being the power of God, at least this particular group. I'm going to say something super provocative.
Let's go.
The true sacrament of Christ is the ultimate power of God. And the reason what I mean by that is the sacrament that I'm referring to, there's other methods. It's not the only method. But but obviously there's an enormous amount of evidence that the ancient cultures recognized what you can do in a true sacrament. And the sacrament is a way. And when I'm using the word the sacrament of Christ, I'm not referring to a persona or an idol that religion has made Jesus Christ to be. That's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to the sacrament of awakening, the sacrament of enlightenment. And so even though I say the sacrament of Christ, and that's the danger of language, is if you try to find the divine in language, like religion say, if you want to get a relationship with God, go read the word. That's like saying, if you want to go find God, go to your shed and go check out the lawnmower.
Right.
Your lawnmower is a tool. These words I'm using is a tool. They can be beneficial tools, but they're awful masters. And real communication lives beyond the tools. And I've had some people come to me and the objection that I get is, yeah, but what about the scripture that says God is the Word and the Word was with God, that scripture? Okay. Was God speaking English? Like, what word are we talking about here?
Right. Yeah, you can get really deep in that. I recently have been studying prayer.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've come to just very, very recently, the profoundness of being able to sit with only my heart and connect to the divine's heart. No words, just connecting from that heart space. No, like not worrying about the words, just understanding the inviting in of the connection to say, here's my heart, here's my truth, here's my pain, here's my sorrow, here are all these things, here's the prayers I have for the rest of the world, and connect to that in that silence is such a beautiful thing. I think Edward Tolle once said that the problem with human beings is that we are trying to define everything through words. Mm-hmm. And so we lose what it actually is because of the illusion of the words, which makes sense. We want to communicate. But when you were saying about, we're talking about the Tower of Babel?
Some people call it the Tower of Babel. Some people.
Babel, yeah, I've heard that.
I call it the Tower of Babel.
Babel, okay. Doesn't really, yeah, either way. But the way that the words get in the way, and also the desire to think that we have to build ourselves this giant pillar to the heavens, and that by building this thing through action, right? Through taking all of this action, by doing all of these things, by trying to be something, be more, create more, that we will be closer to the hands of God, is a complete illusion because
fallacy.
We're already there.
Yeah.
But it's the illusion that we're not there, because why would you want people to have a powerful commune with something of the divine? Because then at some point in time, you recognize just how powerful you are. And when you recognize the power in yourself, you can recognize the power in others. And when you see that you can't outsource that, and that there's nothing anybody can do to take someone off of their balance and keeping them centered, well, geez, you wouldn't really want everybody to have that. But when we have that, all of a sudden it connects us more and more. And I think the other issue is, as far as with God, is the Word of God. I don't mean the Word of God. I mean the word God. Is it a man? Is it a woman? Is it a plant? Is it Pachamama? Is it, is it the universe? Is it this? Is it that? All those words are getting in the way because every single one of those words assume that it is tied to an image of something. It's tied to a man. It's tied to a woman. It's tied to the earth. You know what I mean? Instead of tying it to heart or commune or connection into something higher than ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really appreciate our conversation, and I appreciate the way that you show up. I really do. I appreciate the inner work that you're doing. I appreciate what I actually appreciate the most about you is that you're not trying to create separatism. You're not trying to say you're right and you're wrong.
Exactly.
You're not saying that. You're saying, hey, like, let's figure out a baseline here. You know what I mean? I love you and I want to raise awareness because, well, when I first thought I was going to meet you, just in all transparency,
Certainly.
I thought I was going to meet a very egotistical person that says, I had a journey, I had an experience, I'm writing a book, and now I'm a shaman, now I'm aware, now I'm awakened, now, you know, I wear all of the stuff and I wear my spirituality out here because I've traded one spiritual belief because this is so common. And we had this conversation.
Yeah.
It's so common to see someone trade one religion for another.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I hate your team in basketball, so therefore we're not the same. You know what I mean? I love Chicago. You love, let's say, Utah or whatever. So we can't be on the same page.
Right.
That separatism is what's causing all of our pain in this world.
I agree.
So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And thank you for writing your book. And I look forward to seeing the other books that you've written. One of the things in the book, you have a dedication.
Yes.
And in that dedication, who'd you dedicate it to?
The voiceless.
Why?
Ever since I was a child, this is something that, and the only reason it's a little hard for me to say what I'm about to say a little bit is it sounds like I'm trying to put somebody down, and I just keep to after.
I understand.
You know
I
what I
think
mean?
the viewers understand your heart now.
Yeah. The religion suppresses voice because the most important, what I grew up with was the voice of the priesthood, which is a power outside of you, is more important to listen to than your own inner voice. And so I'm bringing people back or inviting people back to their own inner voice that is not that is not separate from you, your own inner guidance. And so I dedicated it to the voiceless.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's really, really beautiful. I know that you're involved with, business, and you see, as I see, that most of the entrepreneurs out there are some of the most, I don't want to say damaged, but we're just going to use that word because it's not to say they are damaged, but there is a lot of damaging belief systems.
Yeah. And
I know why those have come. And so the word capitalism has a very negative word on it because it has been about raping and pillaging and,
Yes.
About all these different things to make someone greater and bigger. But so the word to you, what does spiritual capitalism mean to you?
So capitalism is putting the capital in the hands of the people. It's giving you the sovereign power to deliver that currency in your own way. And so when you have the power to do that, your own sovereign power, you can use it for something that really honors and blesses a society, or you can use it to destroy a society. The capital itself is neutral. And what I would like to say is things like socialism or even communism per se, it is the ultimate ego. Because what you're effectively doing is you're saying, because I'm so dumb and stupid, somebody else needs to manage my assets.
Right.
Instead, it returns your own sovereignty to you and says, okay, do what you want to do what you can do. The problem that we have is that there has been toxic capitalism. And I would say socialism and communism is a version of toxic capitalism.
Just a different form.
We're just talking. So the capitalism to me is giving its currency, whatever that currency is in whatever country somebody's in, it's the ability for you to decide from your own how that is to be distributed, whatever investment, what you're going to buy. One of the things that since we're talking about capital, is one thing I learned being in finance for 20 years is people spend their money in the direction of their love. And when you come to spirituality, you discover a deeper love. And so you'll cause that money to flow for a higher purpose, where when you're wounded and you're in the ego, the flow of your love is going in the direction of building that ego of, oh, look how big and mighty I am, instead of being willing, if your flow of your love is seeing that the next human next to you is no separate than yourself, you're going to flow that love in that direction.
Yeah, it's as we're talking about parables, I just think about like you'll know them by their fruit. In order to have fruit, you have to put in labor. In order to have to do that, you have to create some form of currency, right? And currency goes well beyond money. Currency is a lot of different things. It's an energetic flow.
Absolutely. There's so many things.
So you have died many times. You have faced cancer, and congratulations on beating that. And that's that's for another story, another time. But by drinking medicine and doing the work you've been doing, you've been ostracized. You've left. You've died multiple times in your ego. You've died multiple times in your own life. When you finally people are around your grave and they're looking down and they're thinking, and you've been gone for a while, what do you want to be remembered for?
It's not so much that I'm looking to be remembered. It's an impact that I want to leave. And that there's a quote, there's a great quote that I'm going to paraphrase it, but a man doesn't really discover what his purpose is until he can plant a tree for a day that he'll never experience its shade. And my work is I'm looking for an impact, whether I'm remembered or not. When I talk about remember, I think quite often that could be an ego trying to remember. I mean, people may remember you, and that's fine. But what I really want to leave is an impact, a tidal wave of impact in the world, and it's not so much about my persona or the persona of Clayne Edward Wayman or anything like that. I would say, if anyone was to remember me for anything, it would be for a positive impact, and it would be to have the realization that the greatest sickness that lives on the earth is the disease of separateness. The ideology of separation is the greatest disease on the earth. And that's what, when spirituality meets capitalism, it brings that into harmony. It heals that separateness, and you're able to powerfully step into your own sovereign intelligence that everyone is. Yeah.
That's so well put. You are very articulate. I'm really happy to hear that you have claimed your voice.
Thank you.
That you are working in your own wisdom and your own divine connection and continuing to speak your words out to the world. For people to find your book, to connect with you, to hear more of these words of wisdom, what's the best place for them to find you?
The book can be found on any online bookstore, Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble. You can even find it on Walmart, Target, anywhere online. I'd say the best place is Amazon.com. If people would like to find me, they could just look me up on social media. On the mortgage side, I'm the Mortgage Mystic on Instagram, or they could look me up on Facebook.
Mortgage Mystic. I love it, man. That's fun. So just so that you guys are aware, the book is Ethos of Resounding Love.
Echoes.
I don't know why I want to say ethos.
Because it's such a good spiritual word.
Yeah, let me see it.
Sorry.
All right, here you go. This is the book right here. I don't even know if we got the name out. We got so deep in our conversation about things that I believe that if people want to know more about you and your spiritual awakening, it's all here.
Yes.
And so one of the things I really want to make sure of that we don't do, and that is to talk about everything in this book so we don't leave any mystery to the book, right?
Yeah.
Which is always funny to me. I'm like, wow, I just read the book.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming out, though. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed our conversation. I look forward to that and creating a friendship and just seeing what we can do together.
All right. Thank you, Dalton.
All right,
I appreciate
man.
having me
Cheers.
on.